Welcome to Real Life and Archetypes. My name is Marina. So, this is going to be part 2 of the archetypal exploration of Christian Craighead's interview on the Shawn Ryan Show. And the last time we left it at, turning the tables around. So, I'm just going to go to the next clip and we will continue from there.
So, you were bullied quite a bit as a kid.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, and this is the thing. Isn't like honestly, I was just about to say there. Was I bullied?
So, was I bullied? Bullied? Look at this face. I want to show you this face. So, this is someone who is talking about how he's interpreting his life. Look at his face of joy. And he just talked in the interview about so many horrible things that have happened to him and exposure to violence, bullies, and, evil people. And he has that face. So, I'm just going to put that face again. So, what this means to me is somebody who really has interpreted the meaning of his life. He has put the pieces all together, and he understands what his experiences have given him, which is meaning. And that's why he has this face. And this is the complexity of the human experience, because remember, in part 1, we could feel in his behavior, in his body language, and the stuff that he was talking about. This was, really, really difficult stuff that he was referring to. But here he has a smile on his face. And it can seem confusing, but, that's what life is. It had a lot of things can be true at the same time, which is that you have, the pain of the things you've been through, and then the interpretation of saying, hey, this has served me so much. So that's why he looks like this.
Because when you normalize chaos, you normalize violence, and so that's they're the most. They're not the most graphic things that ever happened to me, but as I said to someone very close to me, I said, that's the other things that are the worst. They stay in here.
Okay, so someone close to me, the worst things, they stay in here. So now we can see that's the language of the personal self that belongs to the family archetype. This is the self that needs protection. And I think I mentioned that in part 1. When you feel like that, you need to protect something. This is the family archetype. The function of that is we protect something that needs to grow. That's the function of this archetype.
You're pretty closed up. You keep a lot of stuff internalized, it sounds like. Why do you do that?
I think it's because I've been betrayed all my life.
When we're talking about something that is closed up, the family archetype, the personal self, the function of that archetype is that we need to grow. And he's talking about betrayal. So this is what needs to develop in him, how to deal with all of that betrayal. Just continue. I'll continue to talk about this.
And
who is the most important person that's betrayed you?
Oh.
I mean, we know your government is pretty much betrayed you.
That was the answer I was going to say, but
So who's the most important that betrayed you? Because he said, I've been betrayed all my life. That's a blanket statement. That statement, it's the wounds speaking. That's how we speak when we're hurt. So the wounds that we have, that we carry, they have a function. Remember, so he's already spoken, about the personal self. This is the self that needs to mature and develop. And this is the self that is going to have to deal with the wounds. And the wounds of betrayal, this is about dealing with the limitations that we have in life that is going to generate the desire for power and empowerment. And that has a function. So I want to just go back to the hero archetype for a moment because that's pertinent here. The basic function of the hero archetype is the discovery of what you're made of and of, the potential that you really have to fulfill, to connect to really what you really want to do, with the hyper motivation of something that you want to do and the person that you're going to become because you have the courage to really do that. The big obstacle is the world, the entire world that has identities that you're supposed to become, things that you need to pursue. Part of it are references of value. Those references that the world puts in front of you, those are their carrots, and they generate desires. Okay, these are desires that are references given to you by the world. They're not from you. This is, again, this is another polarity that exists in the archetypes based on the zodiac, and that's the one that has natural values, so your own, that are really natural to your natural element, and then the references that are values that the world is putting in front of you. This is where the tension is, because we're going to feel a sense of lack and limitations because the world has those carrots. And the function of this archetype, the one that generates desires that are going to generate wounds that will fuel the fire to have those desires and to grow, um, that's because you're going to have to figure out really if those references are the right ones and everything that is false about that. This is related to the shadow archetype, and the shadow archetype is going to confront us with everything that is dark in the human experience, the desires that we have, and the truth of those desires, and transformation, which is the transmutation of desires, and to really figure out that a lot of the things that we desires that are creating, that are coming from our wounds and our sense of limitations, those desires are not true to ourselves. So we're going to have to do like a cleaning up of references that we have. That is actually the issue. For somebody who has to go into combat, like this man, especially in such extreme, circumstances, the job that he had, he's going to experience everything exponentially, and particularly betrayal. The thing is that betrayal and all of those power dynamics that are going to make us feel very intensely the desire to, be more of something that is a reference that either we have or the world is giving us. So that's the whole battle here. The issue here is that for a warrior, that is going to fuel the fire of motivation. So, for example, that's going to create enemies, that's going to, intensify your motivation. And that's great for what he did. And I can imagine, this is speculation here, I can imagine that I think it's even more true for men because they're wired to that masculine energy, which is motivation. We all have it. They have more. A warrior has even more, and a special operator, like, off the roof. But I can imagine that hanging on to those wounds, especially, the ones that came from his childhood, it fueled a fire of motivation for him. But now this is a guy who's telling us his story. He's coming back to the normal world. And now he has to deal with those wounds in another way, which is that we need to heal our wounds. And that is an issue because what we're actually going to have to deal with is those references that are false.
I think it's just people.
Different parents, women, wives.
I mean, a bit of women, parents. It's all the. Everyone's got their own heartache, if you like. And I think so from a betrayal point of view. I mean, no one's totally innocent. Like I can say, like, oh, a girl may have dumped me or broke my heart, but I probably had something to do with it. And like, I'm not perfect. And then, but that's the thing is being alone.
All right, it's being alone. I want to remind you that he spoke in part one. We saw how he spoke of his grandmother, and I said that this is about the older archetype, the elder archetype. So he has an emotional attachment to the elder archetype. And he said, she's the person that I've become. So he wants to be that person, because in an older self, from the point of view of archetypes, is somebody who has status. He said, I've been betrayed all my life. And Shawn Ryan almost answered for him, because he was trying to figure out, what is it, who has betrayed me the most? It's like, wait a minute, this is a blanket statement. Now I have to define it. And Shawn Ryan said, well, your government, that's related to the older self archetype. Okay, so his government has betrayed him. And if you don't know the story, he took it upon himself to go into a hotel in Nairobi, Kenya, where some terrorists were wreaking havoc and killing people. He happened to be, around in the area, and he figured it. Somebody called him and told him that this was going on, and he just went in. He went in alone, one man in. That's the name of a book that he would like to write, but he can't. But we'll go into that. The thing is that I wanted to point out, look at how the dots are following each other. So you have the older self. He has an emotional attachment and identification. This is imprinted in him. Everything that relates to growing up, it's about status, it's about becoming older, important, respected, VIP, responsible. This older self archetype has a lot of component, but he's talking about being betrayed by his government. So this is a crisis of identification and crisis of identity with the older self. Because of course, if you achieve, and especially he has accomplished climbing the ladder in the military, 28 years career that he had there. And he did this thing in Kenya. And because he was not ordered to go in, and you will find out he was not ordered to not go in either. It was just a whole lot of things that happened. He just went in by himself, and he saved hundreds of lives. But his government is part of that sense of betrayal. Okay, so I just want you to pay attention to the older self, because all of this language is coming through. And he's saying, well, everybody, he's starting to say, yeah, of course, everybody, nobody's totally innocent. But he made that blanket statement, I've been betrayed all my life. That's wounds. Okay, and we need to heal our wounds, and we need to discover the truth of the references. And because he has this identification with the older archetype, the status archetype, and they are linked to betrayal, now the question is, who are you identifying with, and what are the wrong references here of you're placing too much need for validation from people that you're identify as older, that should respect you because now he is older, okay? But he feels betrayed by his government, which is an odd thing to say, because indeed that has happened, but he also had commendation, and he received a medal, I think. So it's just some people, but the wound is there, and he has an identification with that figure. Because remember, he is that person now.
It's that feeling of alone. So, like when you're just an only child, but then there's that thing when you find yourself on your own. I think from an early age it was a defense mechanism for me to then go, okay, I can do this. I'm strong. And then I'll move on and do things. And then every now and again, I sometimes let someone in. And then when I let them in, sometimes they might not see what they like, or I might show them too much.
There's a lot going on here. If you've noticed, I need to rewind this because this is just a lot of stuff. I think this is why I like this interview so much, because he's really going into everything that's related to emotions. So look at how he's going from one thing to another. Okay, I've been betrayed all my life. let me find out who. Yes, okay, the government. Yeah, that fits. I identify with that betrayal. And then he starts to say, well, everybody goes through, nobody's totally innocent. We all do things, which is true. But then he says, it's about being alone. This is the root of the issue here. And this is a very common thing for people who have a lot of the hero archetype. I think I mentioned that in part 1, that you're so capable. You've pushed yourself so much. You're going to have the loner side of you. And that's something that you've developed yourself. So he's mixing a lot of stuff in here. Let me just rewind a little bit.
Like, I'm not perfect, and then, but that's the thing is being alone. It's that feeling of alone. So like when you're just an only child, but then there's that thing when you find yourself on your own. I think from an early age it was a defense mechanism for me.
So when he feels betrayed, he feels alone. He feels abandoned. So I'm speculating here, but I'm just showing you the language, what is coming out here. Okay, so identification with the figure of the older self, which is his grandmother. So that's an emotional identification with what represents hierarchy, status. He'll mention other stuff later about how he respects people of authority. He talks about, I've been betrayed, and the result is that he's alone. So he lost his grandmother, that figure of authority of the older self. So betrayal, the result of betrayal is that now I feel abandoned, alone. And, I have to fight. If I'm alone, I get into survival mode and I feel completely apart from the world. I have to conquer the world. I have to carve my space. So again, I have to fight. This is how archetypes really start to come up to the surface when you listen to somebody. He's telling about his life and look at how he's going. It's like, I'm a little reluctant, but at the same time, I just love looking at these things. I do that with myself, with everybody. I don't mean, to disrespect and to analyze in a way that is not, it's not right. But I think you can understand this is the way that we can see ourselves. We can recognize what we're talking about. I've been betrayed all my life, and then he's talking about being alone. Because now he's back into this, younger self who is alone, who has to fight to have his identity. And he fought to have an identity in the military, which he always wanted to join. And he felt betrayed by people at the top, a few of them. Not everybody, really, but that's the way he feels.
To then go, okay, I can do this. I'm strong. And then I'll move on and do things. And then every now and again, I sometimes let someone in.
Okay, so he's alone. He has to fight. He knows I'm strong. I can do it. If I've done all that I've done, he's done. Yeah, this is a question that a lot of normal people have when you look at these guys. What the hell? Now you have to deal with the normal world, and that is difficult after everything that you've done. Well, that's the human experience right there. We all have vulnerabilities. Doesn't matter how strong you are. So he says, okay, I'm betrayed now. I feel alone. I can do this because I have the strength. Look at everything that I've done. And now he's talking about letting someone in. So, of course, to remedy being alone, okay, which is great, you're strong, you conquer, but we all need to belong in a human system. That's the family archetype. And he doesn't have his family. His grandmother passed away when he was very young. So all of this is connected. This is what he wants. He really wants to belong and to feel a sense of family. And a government is the outside form of family. It's a society we want to integrate, but this is an archetype of the older self and the family archetype. Capricorn and Cancer in the zodiac, they're, opposite. They need to work together. So that's the thing here. This is what he's talking about. To be alone, and now you have to fight again. And now I let someone in. Why do you let someone in? Because he wants to be part of, a human system.
And then when I let them in, sometimes they might not see what they like.
When I let them in, sometimes they might not see what they like. This is insecurity about who you really are. Let's continue, because now comes the real thing.
Or I might show them too much. And it's this thing about being Christian Craighead versus my real self.
This is the thing about being Christian Craighead, so that his status, that's the older self, versus being my real self, which is the personal self. So he lets somebody in, they might not like what they see. So this is insecurity. By the way, this happens to all of us. This is what I want to point out. This is not about I'm sorry, Mr. Craighead, I'm not, this is about how we all do that. Okay? We all have these insecurities, and especially let me digress for a moment, because I think this is where I want to talk about the culture aspect. He's European, so am I. I don't know the British culture not very well. I do live in a place where there's a lot of tourists from the UK, but that's not knowing the culture. But I come from the French culture, European culture primarily. And in Europe, the concept, status and VIPs, it's very important here. And in the French culture, it's even, it's really, really important. You're nobody if you don't have like a title, a real title, and recognition. This is actually about belonging or integrating into society. That's why society is completely linked to the family system. And wherever you go in life, we're human beings. So there's always a human system. So whatever issues we have that come from our childhood growing up, we're going to replicate, project, find, and be in conflict with in any other human system. We're going to do that. So if we carry our insecurities. That's why we need to grow up and develop and be able to be with other human beings. But he's described perfectly the opposition of forces of these two archetypes: society, the older self, and the family, the personal self. Because usually for cultures that put a lot of importance to important people, VIP, the personal life, the private life, and the development of the personal self is completely discarded. I come from that kind of culture, and my family, it's all about status, the name of the school, the name of the job title, accomplishment. That's the older self, that's the Capricorn archetype. It's all about that. You are nothing if you don't have that. And I think that Shawn Ryan maybe doesn't know that about our culture in Europe, but this is a real thing. It's like you're nobody. And so this guy who has become a status, and his name is Christian Craighead, for the purposes of, his new life in the real world with his accomplishments, that should give him the respect and the recognition. He has an identity, but he has this one too. How do you, integrate these two? Because he's talking about his real self as opposed to the name that he has in the public. And that's a huge issue if you have both archetypes a lot, because, listen, I understand this concept so well because that's a huge issue in my family, in my own personal life. My entire life, it's always been about, who are you in terms of how can you be recognized in society? So when you're small, you don't have status, you don't have a title, it's just impossible. The problem is that you don't exist until you have that. And in order to get to that, you need support in order to grow. And that's the problem when those things are completely separate and separated. And so you fight to have your identity. And this guy has fought. I mean, everything that he's done is to be at the top. And you'll see in the full interview, to go with the elite and to go at a higher level of being. That's the status, because that's going to give him the identity that he's looking for. But now he has to deal with his wounds, and the wounds are actually, telling us you need to clean up and look at the references that you have, what has true value. So for me, that would be, who are you identifying with that is so important? And does that really match who you need to be also as your true self? Because, that's the whole point. They should link, they should match, they should be compatible. You shouldn't identify with an older, with a society and hierarchy and a status and a title that doesn't correspond to who you really are inside, and especially with your experiences and the personal self, how you've personalized your experiences. And if you have those wounds, you're not going to feel comfortable, because that's what the personal self seeks, to feel comfortable. You need to feel comfortable in your own skin. So he has this contradiction here, these opposition of forces. I want the status, but actually I don't fit in, I don't belong. Well, you're not going to fit in and belong with everybody, but you certainly have, this higher level of being, and you need to be that. The function of the older self, by the way, ultimately is to use our experience and our authority to help others climb the ladder. That's the real function of that archetype. It's just that most people who, seek positions higher and higher of power, government, hierarchies, they don't deal with the personal, the, helping others or supporting the growth and development of others. But that's actually what the older self is supposed to do. So if you just go up there just for the status and the title, a lot of people, they do that and they're fine because that's their world, and they don't deal with the personal self, with emotions. They hate it, they will reject it, they can't handle that. There's a lot of sociopath at the top because they don't deal with the emotional world, the personal world. They don't want to hear about it. But this guy has a lot of that archetype. He feels. He has memories of what he felt. He thinks about, family and his grandmother and everything that's happened to him. He can't help it. So he's not going to be compatible with people who don't have that humanity and that ability to protect others. He talks a lot about protecting. He hates bullies because he was bullied. So the trait of protector is huge in these guys. A lot of them. I mean, they always talk about that. It's about protection. It's about being heroes, but to protect family, close one, countries. That's the same archetype. It's the family archetype. So you go at the top. Now you arrive at the top, and it turns out that there's a lot of assholes in those areas. That's just the real world. So now he says, the problem is to feel alone. You let someone in and they might see something they don't like. What is it that they wouldn't like? Well, if they don't like what they see, they're not compatible. That's how we need to understand it. And by the way, the most difficult thing is to have to deal with your own family who do not have, who do not nurture you, who do not encourage you. His grandmother is the only one who believed in him and who really saw him for who he was and his potential. So that's what he needs. That's the personal self has needs. That's what he needs from people who are close to him, that kind of nurturing of belief in him and what he can do. But now, as a grown up, you need to be the older self. So your role now is to restitute your experience and help nurture others so that they achieve higher levels of being. And you're going to see throughout this entire interview, he's going to talk a lot about it. I'm going to finish here because this is already too long, and I will continue. This is going to take a while. I'm sorry, but you know, there's a lot. I really love this interview. Culturally, you know, about this thing, yeah, I don't want to get too much into that because that's gonna stir some of my own wounds. Um, but this is, you know, for those of us who have this older self archetype, you know, the achievement, getting to the top at higher level. I have that, for example, to, you know, learn a lot of things at the highest level. It's never enough because I was not accepted inside the family. I'm not accepted inside the family if I'm not at the top. But you need family, you need support in order to get to the top. That's the paradox here. And it happens a lot. So a lot of people will pursue, you know, going at higher levels and higher levels. And if they're sociopaths, they'll be fine with not feeling anything. But for those of us who have those archetypes and we feel, we need to have a human closeness to belong to a human system that is going to give us something that we need. We need to be in an environment that is going to foster that kind of development. So for him, I think, you know, his role now is to say, hey, I'm older. Now I'm the one that has to do what others didn't do for me, which is to encourage, support, and nurture me, because he had that only from his grandmother and temporarily. So I'm just going to leave it there and we'll continue the next time. Thank you for watching.